Bring these statistics up because this is by far the single most important economic bit of data to determine when and how we get out of this mess. House prices have to stop falling, and everybody wants to figure out how to do that, and nobody's really done it yet. But if you look at Gary Schilling, he used Standard & Poor's, this graph shows how the bubble in housing erupted from 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2002. You can see house prices rose quite dramatically from peak to trough, 37%. And Schilling believes that there's another 20% decline on average across homes in the United States, and that decline is going to last probably through the first quarter of 2010, or maybe mid-2010. We should reach trough, according to Schilling. Schilling, by the way, is a deflationist, but he's a very, very smart economist, in 2010, which would mean that we will have pressure on the banks through at least 2009. So if you were thinking about, how long is this going to go? It's going to go as long as we have pressure on real estate, because pressure on real estate puts pressure on the banks. They have to write off bad paper, they have to raise capital, and then it filters its way through the economy. There are other factors here. This is Barclays' forecast for the next 3 years. Barclays says there's $1.3 trillion worth of option arm mortgages and IO mortgages to be recast. This is very recent. In fact, it's from 3 days ago. And so here are the numbers, and it shows going out into 2010, 2011, and ending in 2012, where Barclays believes that we will have option arm resets or recasts. And in that period of time, we will have recasts of between 60 and 80% upward pricing on mortgages. I quote them. They say in their research, which I just pulled off, these were late cycle mortgages. Many were written on speculative transactions, so that they were written at the top of the market. Many are negatively amortized, and resets could produce 60% to 80% payment shocks. So if you're really pessimistic, we could have 2010, 2011, 2012 pressure on the housing market as option arms, adjustable reset mortgages come into play, and as interest-only mortgages, many of which are negatively amortized, also are reset. So it's possible that we could have 3 or 4 more years of housing issue. Housing is absolutely the single most important factor in moving ahead with the economy. This is from the Associated Press. This was from 2 weeks ago. Increasingly, American homeowners are upside down. 7.5 million American homeowners are now underwater in their mortgages. 2.1 million are about to enter this category. That is 25% of all mortgages, according to First American CoreLogic. 25% of all mortgages are about to be in that category where they're not worth, where they're worth more than the assets underlying them. Assume that the average mortgage is $150,000. This means that $1.5 trillion in mortgages are at risk. This is why a bottom to the housing decline is absolutely so critical to the health of the financial system, and why large banks won't lend today. This is my opinion. They see many more write-offs coming down the road as more of these mortgages, as more of these homeowners default and go into foreclosure. This is why the FDIC wants to spend $250 billion on current foreclosure problems. This is why the Obama administration wants to do that. Everybody's trying to figure out how to stop the foreclosure problem and get the banking system settled. Going on, we now know that there's leverage everywhere. Of course, leverage and debt was the single most important catalyst in this crisis. And basically, it's been neatly, in many cases, transferred to Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. That's you and I, to a large degree. The Fed's balance sheet is now levered 55 to 1. When Bear Stearns went under, they were levered about 40 to 1. I knew a lot of people at Bear Stearns. Goldman Sachs is levered 20 to 1. Commercial banks are supposed to be levered 10, 11, 12 to 1 under regulation. Federal Reserve capital is about $40 billion. Federal Reserve credit is now $2.2 trillion. And that has increased has grown just in the last few months by $1 trillion. So the Fed's balance sheet is being expanded now, and they are essentially taking on credit. My view is, yes, we need to save some of these institutions, but by continuing to propagate certain companies, I won't mention necessarily General Motors or General Electric or Citibank, we continue to push this problem out into the future instead of solving the problem by dealing with it now. So the government has begun to assume consumers' leverage, and so the question is this deflation now and massive inflation later? That's where the Fed is. You heard from the speaker last night. Basically, the worry in the Fed in Washington is that we are going to experience deflation, that we are going to tip into deflation. And for my sense is I've heard a lot of people in this last couple of days talk about the notion that we are in a deflation, and I don't think we are. We're in a liquidation. There's a big difference. Assets are being liquidated, but it's not clear to me yet that we've entered a deflationary recession. So the question then for Chairman Bernanke is as follows: how do I tip this fulcrum so that we go the other way, and how do we do it quickly? And that's what Mr. Hale talked about last night. That's his biggest issue. No question about it, the U.S. economy in 2007 was 13.8 trillion, in other words, the GDP. You know, there are all kinds of different counters going on here, but if you looked at what's been done so far, a lot of money has either been committed or has been promised to the problem. For example, the Bear Stearns guarantee was either 29 or 40 billion. The first stimulus bill was 150 billion. AIG, listen to this, on September the 15th, AIG said 40 billion would do the trick. AIG is now 150 billion and counting. And they're trying to buy back those CDOs, those collateralized debt obligations, so they can deliver them on the insurance that they wrote, which was called credit default swaps. But they're now at 150 billion and growing. Fannie and Freddie, Freddie went to the Fed, I think, on Friday. They have a $200 billion guarantee. Mexico, Brazil, Korea, and Singapore, we made a currency swap for 30 billion each with each of those 4 countries. And the reason we did it is because they need dollars. Everybody's wondering why the dollar is so strong. It's because everybody in the world needs dollars, because they've got to reduce their debt, and they need dollars to do that. TARP, the famous TARP, which is being kicked around like an old football now, 700 billion and growing. It's not exactly certain how that's going to be used. GM and Chrysler, a green loan of 25 billion. It's probably obvious that once Mr. Obama takes over the presidency, that he will do something there in addition to that. The FDIC has proposed 250 billion to forestall foreclosures. We just talked about that. There's a second proposed stimulus bill that will happen. It might not happen before January 22nd, but it will happen, of 300 to 500 billion in the works. There are emergency bank loans, and nobody's got any visibility on these. So there's a lot of lawsuits flying around Washington now to try and find out who made what loan to whom and why. And that's a big number. That's about $2 trillion, they think. And then there are 7 credit facilities which have been dealt with. And in fact, it's interesting to note that General Electric just went to one of the credit facilities for its commercial paper. So total so far is somewhere around $4 trillion, which is about it's about 30% of GDP, and we haven't solved the problem yet. So get your wallets out, or buy gold, one or the other, because you're either going to monetize this, or you and I are going to pay. But it's not just the U.S., and there was some good points made at the luncheon today, making dollars available. And here you have central banks around the world that are now anteing up, and they need dollars also. The Bank of England, 40 billion. The Bank of Japan, 60 billion. The European Central Bank, up to 110 billion. The Swiss National Bank, 15 billion. And the Bank of Canada, 10 billion. Starting to get big, right? You know, I get mixed up between billions and trillions. And if you go above trillions, you get to quadrillions. And that's 15 zeros. We're talking about a lot of money here. It makes me feel little.